the city's ADU code and voice our support for this proposal as presented in both items. ADUs, attached and detached, are a sought-after housing choice and offer significant community benefits. They make it easier for younger home buyers to qualify for their first home and enable seniors to age in place, as well as expanding options for multi-generational living. And overall, they're very environmentally friendly housing options as well. They're an important housing choice because they fit into our existing communities and neighborhoods while providing a very affordable option. And I've sent comment letters before with a link to a Turner Center report out of UC Berkeley that finds that 58% of ADUs studied were rented for below market rate across the country, and 17% of homeowners were allowing friends and family members to stay in ADUs for free. It just provides more density, it keeps families together, and ADUs are critical tools for accommodating growth in the very places where families want to live, which is near job centers. They want to, develop workforce housing. They don't want to be able to, or don't want to have to drive for half an hour to get to their job, near existing infrastructure and near city center amenities, which make our communities such vibrant places to live. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on these changes, and we look forward to continued collaboration on housing opportunities in Federal Way. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any other questions or share any other literature we might have on ADUs, and I look forward to the implementation of these code changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is committee business. Anybody on the dais have something they'd like to bring up? Okay, we'll go to our first order of business. And first of all, I should excuse Mr. Tran. Councilmember Tran is out of town right now, and I think he's in an airplane somewhere. So we will now go to committee approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes of the May 1st meeting.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now we'll go to ordinance adoption of the T2429 TIP. Mr. Perez.
Thank you and good evening. I'm going to get this started and then go back here to share screen. Okay. Sarah?
Sorry, what?
Do we need, okay, this is weird then.
Oh, video.
Let's see. Try it now. Well, do not know how to proceed at this point. Pardon? I know it's not. It's given.
Try it again, see what I just.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
All right. Get going here. So. Now I'm open. I'm saying. I know. Here, I'll move this. Oh, yeah, I always forget. That's there. That's the way I'm used to doing it. All right. So tonight I'm presenting the 2024 to 29 Transportation Improvement Program. Policy question is, should the council authorize staff to proceed with the adoption?
Hey, Rick, could you move the microphone up a little bit? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, yeah, thanks. The adoption of the 2024-29 City of Federal Way Transportation Improvement Program on June 20th. So a little bit of background. The TIP outlines a 6-year plan for transportation-related capital projects. It's updated annually. It is a requirement for grant eligibility. It must be financially constrained, as in needing to have reasonable chance of funding within the first 3 years, must conform to air quality requirements, and is adopted after a public hearing which is going to be on the 20th. So we have several prioritization criteria. One is level of service improvement, which is basically congestion measures. Number of collisions, collision rates, collision severity rates, and whether a project is supportive of high occupancy vehicles and non-motorized users. Level of community support, air quality, ease of implementation, and benefit cost ratios. So this map illustrates where the proposed projects are, and seeing an increased emphasis on non-motorized and the needier parts of the community. So the staff report says we don't have any completed projects, and that's true, but we're close on a couple of them. So the roundabout at SR 509 and 47th Avenue Southwest, and also the Safe Routes to School project on SR 509 from 312th to 21st Avenue Southwest are soon to be completed. And the one project we're adding is the grade separation proposal at South 320th and 21st Avenue South. Another proposed new project is 28th Avenue South along the east side. We're proposing sidewalk on street lights from 312th to 308th Lane. And so that concludes the changes. Options considered is number one, to approve the resolution adopting the TIP as presented, or do not forward the draft document and provide direction to staff. And the mayor's recommendation is option one. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions here from the dais? Yes, Deputy Member Honda?
Thank you. On the TIP program from 24 to 29, there's some bike lane improvements listed.
Yes.
Will those be separated from, bike lanes be separated from cars, or will they just be striped?
So it's going to depend on the project, and since some of them haven't been designed yet, we don't always know. Now, the 288th Street project, the road diet there, that will be what we call buffered bike lanes. So, yeah, the viability of doing that depends on how much and whether or not we're widening the roadway to accommodate it or taking away through traffic lanes.
Okay, it's much safer, in my opinion, if they're,
There is evidence that it does improve safety, yes, and increasing cyclist comfort and to a certain extent the pedestrians as well.
the roundabout at 373rd,
Yes.
when will that be started?
So we've hired the designer, and we're looking at right-of-way construction, and Christine can contradict me if necessary.
We have a consultant who's on board working towards 30% at this point. Then we do have a right-of-way we need to acquire for that one. And I believe we are scheduled to go out to bid late 2024, planning for 2025 construction.
Okay, thank you.
Good, I would have guessed right. Okay, any other questions?
I see no questions. Do I have a motion?
Yes. I move to forward the proposed, let's see here, the proposed resolution of the June 20th, 2023 council meeting for adoption.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to item C, Lakota Middle School Safe Routes to School Request for Additional Funds. Mr. Mulkey.
Second, uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Get rid of his. Just setting mine up here. Excuse me. Chair Dovey, council member, deputy mayor. My name is John Mulkey, and I'm a senior civil engineer for the City of Federal Way, and I'm presenting the Lakota Safe Routes to School. Share screen. Here I go. Okay, so this is Lakota Middle School Safe Routes to School request for additional funds. The policy question is, should council authorize an increase of $50,000 to the maximum contracted amount for Active Construction, Inc., and also authorize a transfer of $190,000 from the Transportation Capital 306 Fund to Lakota Middle School Safe Routes to School Project 36204. And I have a vicinity map that shows the area of the construction along the frontage of Lakota Park on Southwest Dash Point Road, and a picture of the work as it is up through today, or actually from last week. On the funding summary, we show we have a balance. If with that extra $190,000, we can balance our expenditures and construction. We had some overruns in the contract and construction management and in design on the project. And so the options considered are authorize an increase of $50,000 to the maximum contract amount for Active Construction, Inc., and also authorize a transfer of $190,000 from the Transportation Capital 306 Fund to the Lakota Middle School Safe Routes to School project number 36204, or do not approve an increase to the maximum contract amount for Active Construction, Inc., and do not authorize a transfer of funds. And the mayor recommends option 1, and I'm available for questions.
Deputy Mayor Honda, you have a question?
I do. Is this project complete?
We're basically at punch list, so we have some items that need to be corrected, like they had some striping issues that happened when they did the striping that needs to be completed. So in order to complete the project, there's a few minor issues, but basically it's functionally complete.
So if we don't approve this funding, then what would happen since the work is,
Well, they probably, we owe them the money, so we'd have to,
so,
they could probably sue us and
Okay.
get the money from us or something like that, yeah.
all right, thank you.
Now, what was the reason for the cost overruns?
Oh, there was multiple reasons. We had issue with our excavation quantities, that there was a specification that was misread that amounted to a fairly significant amount. We had a mistake on one of the callouts for a pole that changed, that was a $20,000 callout mistake, just with a different number. We had additional work for the park. We added some extra excavation and paving around the parking lot for the park to extend those areas out. Some extra storm drain that we found that was damaged that we had to replace. There's lots of things that kind of increased our costs over the course of the project.
The errors in calculation, was that on the errors on the part of the city or on the contractor or what?
It wasn't really an error on calculation it was, so for the drainage, it was more of an error on the specification as to what we thought it read versus what they read. Our intent was that we wouldn't pay for any excavation or backfill. We said, and it was a use of words, whether it was either or, kind of turned into, you could use native backfill versus this. We didn't allow native backfill in that material because it's not good there. And so the way that it was written wasn't clear enough for us to be able to make that next step forward, and we kind of lost that argument. The intent was to not pay for it, but it wasn't worded correctly.
So are we taking action to make sure that that type of error does not occur in the future?
Yes, we've already made changes to those specifications where those errors have been made.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
I have one more question. The 190 that we're transferring, that was already part of the project, correct?
EJ?
The 50,000 is the overrun and the 190 was always going to be part of it?
Correct.
Correct, that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the overall budget. It's just
Right.
not assigned to the
Yeah, so
overall, to the significant project.
Yeah.
So,
So we're really
in
talking
short,
about
yes.
50,000, not 240,000.
correct.
Okay.
But we need
It-
authorization to increase the total contract because of the
Yeah.
contract value that was approved by council versus the project value that was approved by council.
And the question is, this is just a question I have, when you get into discussions like native backfill or imported backfill, to me, I get it, but that would mean I probably would never use the guy again that did the construction. Do we kind of think that way?
Sort of.
You got to
So, yeah,
collaborate sometimes?
Yes,
Okay.
there's a much larger conversation there
Yeah,
with how.
I understand. I'm
How
just-
contractors are qualified and what we can debar them for. But yes, we certainly take that into
Okay.
account when we're looking at future projects.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda, you have a question?
I do. So this is a significant project for safety of the kids who go to Lakota or even Decatur, because I know that they walk that way. But at what point would you have come to council before you did the work if you knew that you were having cost overruns before you did the work? Is there a dollar point that you would have come to us?
Well, I would have come, I didn't know we were going over budget until we came up with this number until now. We were within our contingency, and then this issue happened that pushed us over. We had an issue with some tear out and damages to the pavement when we took out some curb. And so and some damages to the striping. So basically, we were on the cusp of being there and not having to, and this sent us over the top. And so I came as soon as
Okay.
that happened, at that point.
Thank you.
Okay, Lydia, you have a question? I see your hand raised.
I didn't. I think collectively everyone asked my question, but I left it there so you would notice. But so thank you. No, my
Okay.
questions were asked.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
though.
Okay, is there a motion?
I move to forward option 1 to the June 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I will second it. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we'll now move to item D, resolution, intent to designate the community business zone a residential target area for purposes of city multifamily tax exemption program and setting a public hearing for July 18th, 2023. Mr. Niven.
Good evening, Chair Dovey, Committee Member Walsh, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and Council Member Sefa Dawson. So if you remember the Housing Action Plan implementation work done by Heartland included 9 recommendations. We're dealing with most of those recommendations tomorrow night, both in the special council meeting and in the regular meeting. There was one recommendation, because it relates to Title III and not Title 19, it got separated out, and that's the recommendation to expand the multifamily tax exemption from just the city center zones to include the BC zone. So what this resolution does, all it does is set the hearing, which would be July 18th. We have to notice it twice in the mirror, and then it'll be in front of LUTC in July as well for a conversation before we get to the hearing later in July. So the ask for this evening is for council to go ahead and set the hearing for July 18th.
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This is, just so I'm clear in my mind, this is the tax exemption that's either 8 or 12 years that an organization can get based on how much subsidized housing and things like that they do, correct?
Correct. 8-year, there's no requirement for affordable housing. 12 years, there's a 20%
Right.
Requirement.
And we will be putting this in every BE zone, I think it's BE zone, right?
BC.
Yeah, in the city.
Right, and so the BC zone is primarily kind of up and down Pack Highway.
Right.
Yeah, and that would now augment the city center core and city center frame.
Which is, brings us competitive with all our other cities that are around us, correct?
Absolutely, it's really intended to increase housing production.
And what about projects that are going? Will we make it retroactive if we pass this?
City attorney shaking his head no.
No.
Okay. Is there a motion? Or any other questions?
I make sure I'm on the right one here. I move to forward the proposed resolution of the June 20th, 2023 consent agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to the next one, right? View Protection Code amendments.
Yeah, so if you remember, you guys had a council retreat in January, and I kind of gave you an overview of some of the code revisions we had coming up. And when I got to talking about view protection from the PAC and downtown, you guys said, that one's super important, bring it forward as soon as you can. So here we are this evening. So, oops, too far. So the policy question in front of the City Council is, should the City Council amend Title 19 of the Federal Way Revised Code to protect views of Mount Rainier from public spaces downtown? And so when we took this to the Planning Commission, once upon a time, we had drafted some language, and there was a lot of questions from the Planning Commission. One, what exactly is this view of Mount Rainier? We did not at the time have an image in the code. We were trying to describe it. They thought it was too vague. Where is the vantage point that you're taking that view from? Again, I think it was too vague. So City Attorney and I worked on a number of iterations. I think this is about version 6. So hopefully this is clear and meets the expectations you all have. So we are going to put this view, this image into the city code. And basically what it says is you cannot penetrate that polygon with your building or appurtenance without impacting the view of Mount Rainier, which would not be allowed. It is taken from basically kind of the southeast corner of the PAC. You know, we spent a lot of money on glass windows on that ground floor of the PAC so that you could have that view, and so that seemed to make the most sense to me. There was a conversation about whether or not it should be also from Town Square Park. And so this image, and so this is from the parking lot at Town Square Park, and you can see Mount Rainier's here. This was a little bit less of a clear day. What you see here, and I'm using this as a point of reference, this is the Sound Transit track that you see heading towards 320th as it kind of dives behind this tree. That's at about 25 feet tall. So if you extend that across here, you know, getting to that same viewpoint would be about a 4-story building. And so I think because you're lower, there's a different vantage point. And I think one of the things that we're trying to keep in mind is this is the part of the city we're really trying to encourage taller buildings. And so at least what's in the ordinance now is not including a vantage point from Town Square Park, just from up on the TC3 property. The way that the zoning map is going to change, there's basically going to be this overlay. And so this diagram that you see here, this kind of gray shading, are going to be any property that's located within that area is going to need to do a view analysis to demonstrate that their proposed buildings do not impact that polygon that we've created on that previous image. So originally on, I think, version 4, we had some specific heights we were trying to limit properties to. That's the version that Sound Transit took issue to back in April and asked for us to continue this until now. We have had multiple conversations with Sound Transit since then, and my understanding is they are okay with the proposed code as we've kind of dialed it up this time. So code amendments need to satisfy consistent with applicable provisions of the comp plan, which this is. There's a specific goal in the comp plan to preserve views of Mount Rainier. The proposed amendment bears substantial relationship to public health, safety, welfare, and the proposed amendment is in the best interest of the residents of the city. And then Planning Commission, as I mentioned earlier, they wanted additional clarifications to the proposed revisions, including better describing the view to be protected and the viewpoint. The mayor's recommendation is to approve the proposed code change. So with that, I am done.
Yeah, I have one question. Do you, could you go back to the picture?
Yes, sir.
So, you know, being up there at the Arts Festival the other day, going out there and looking, it seems to me that when I looked at your map, if you come to the right of that, you're overlooking the mall. And if this was expanded, how would that kind of frame it? Because when you look out from the pack, you know, you don't just look this corridor, you kind of look at this big view, and are we cutting it down so we're just looking at a little slice, or are we, because your map, this whole area
Yes.
looks to me like you're going to be, it's going to move like this, and you got to stand at the right angle at the left side of the door to see the mountain type thing.
Great questions. So that viewpoint is from here, where my arrow is, if you can see that. Mount Rainier is down here. So the commons, as you can see, at least according to our GIS folks, they believe that the commons is outside of that view corridor that we're trying to limit building heights to. So I think, to your point, if there was if Target got redeveloped with a mid-rise building, I think it would be off to the right of this view that we're trying to save.
But part of the view, when you get there and look, it's the mountain, but it's also the green trees behind it. I mean, again. I'm just wondering if we're putting a picture frame around the mountain and then letting everything come up, and all of a sudden we just have a picture frame around the mountain.
So part of, I guess part of this is, this polygon is completely discretionary. We can draw it. The mountain is the mountain. At some point when you get down to this level, everything below it is always in a shadow, right? And so part of it, and you can see the hotel top is right here. My first suggestion for this was the BPA lines. But the city attorney told me that was a bad idea, so I walked that back. So if the committee chair thinks that we should go farther west than what I've drawn, so right now what's happening here is this starts to really kind of tail off.
Yeah.
So the amount of value over here, kind of in this corner that might just be off this slide, is fairly small. So I think what we assumed is if we could keep this from not having any buildings in it, that would be a win.
Okay.
Now, for some of the other areas, like down on Town Square Park, you're going to still have views of Rainier. They're just going to be peekaboo. You might have to move a little bit one way or the other to get it, but there'll still be peekaboo views from lower down than TC3.
I'm not worried about Town Square Park.
Okay.
With Town Square Park, even the trees that are growing in Town Square Park will
Peekaboo.
interfere with, yeah. So,
Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda, or did you?
whichever.
I am worried about Town Square Park. I think it's a pretty important piece of property downtown, and I like to maintain the views of the mountain as much as possible. So, saying that, when the power lines, will the power lines be elevated when Sound Transit goes underneath them? And how will that impact this?
So I'm going to let EJ field that one if he can.
Yes, they go up.
I could've
And how
done
will that impact this?
Yeah, so as currently drafted, this protection applies to all structures, which presumably the BPA lines would also be one of those structures to which this applies. However, I don't think legally we can prevent the BPA lines from going up either through some sort of a essential public facility argument legally or through some sort of a preemption argument from a federal level. So I don't think that we can use, even though this will by its terms apply to those higher structures, those higher BPA towers, I don't think we're going to be able to prevent their increase in height through this ordinance, regardless of how we draft it.
Well, maybe we could try and see if they can give us some concessions somewhere else. Like, they're doing a lot of things downtown that maybe we might want some concessions with. I don't know.
I guess to kind of reiterate that in a different way, I don't think we could even potentially prevent them from doing that. So I'm not sure we have a bargaining chip that we can
Okay.
use.
Okay. How high will they go? Do you know yet?
No, Sound Transit's commissioned the BPA to do the engineering that's currently in the process. turning my mic off while I'm trying to talk to you. The low number we've heard is 15. I think the high number is 40. But they're in the process of actually doing that engineering right now to determine it. The big thing is not the actual clearance for the train to get under. It's the separation when the train goes under between the two electric wires and the fields not influencing them, because both of them are DC systems as opposed to AC like it's in your house. So it's not as simple as just, hey, we need this much separation. There's a fair amount of design work that goes into that.
I imagine it's pretty complicated. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, my question is kind of going the other direction with the, where we're looking at having more of a civic area there. I'd say that how far to the east would we be able to preserve a view? I mean, obviously, the new addition to the parking structure and the parking structure down below would probably impact that some, but I'm not, I'm not quite sure how.
If I'm understanding your question, council member, yes. So the PAC sits in this kind of lower left-hand corner. We're also talking about building a big city plaza immediately east of that. I think, the good news is the farther north you go, the better your view of the mountain is. If you want us to include a second viewpoint from where the plaza would be, I think we can do that. I think we do need to do a little bit of work, but I think we could do that.
And actually, if I might just tack on a little bit to that, that could also alleviate Chair Dovey's comments about the tunneling effect of the view as well. If you specify multiple viewpoints that are across a wider area, say one on the west corner of the PAC, one on the east corner of the PAC, that's the current one, and one, say, in the proposed public space, you would then have a wider viewpoint that would be protected in the first place and have less of that kind of tunnelization effect of the view. But that is something we can do. Currently, we have one viewpoint, but we could expand that to as many viewpoints as you guys think is a good idea.
Yeah. And with that, maybe on the map here, instead of just having the parcels, kind of a dotted line showing the view corridor going down from the sites. I mean, is that getting too?
Actually, in one of the several previous iterations, we did in fact have kind of a dotted line of just here's where the view is. The reason it's this way is to avoid any ambiguity about where such a dotted line might or might not cross a certain parcel. So we've basically just gone by the parcel outlines that way.
I mean, it sounds like, I'm definitely in favor of having the parcels there, but kind of to the dotted line as well. I don't know. But I'm not saying that not to get rid of the parcel stuff, because I definitely see the wisdom in that. So anyway, that's my comments.
I think the message is we only have the view, excuse me, we only have the view once.
Yeah.
The minute we let it go away, we will never get it back. So
I'm hearing it would be nice to have maybe a couple other vantage points to improve the view from kind of the wide range of TC3.
Every vantage point you can find,
Okay.
every single one.
We'll bump that up.
I mean,
the better
I
the-
haven't heard of any state or federal plans to move Rainier, have you? I mean, it's, just-
I don't think we have a chit there either.
Unless it blows up and then you know what, but.
Well, yeah, that definitely changes the view.
We can reduce the view polygon down to where it's blown up.
Of course, if it's the state planning to do it, I mean, if they completed that as quickly as they've completed Highway 18, I mean, we don't need to worry about it anyway, so anyway.
Indeed.
So, do you have a motion?
I move to
And if I might recommend that you include in your motion the addition of additional viewpoints.
All right, I forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on June 20th with the inclusion of additional viewpoints.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. And now we will talk about Title 18 Accessory Dwelling Units Code Amendments.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for bearing with me. Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Committee Member Walsh, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and Council Member Assefa-Dawson. I'm here tonight. I've got 3 presentations. First, starting with the proposed code amendments to Title 18, which is our subdivision code. In regards to amending, in response to encouraging ADU production, accessory dwelling units. So the policy question for this presentation is, should the city amend the Federal Way Revised Code, Title 18 subdivisions, to implement Housing Action Plan Strategy Number 4 to encourage ADU production? Our meeting objective is to review the key issues and barriers and to present the proposed solutions. This is really a short presentation. There's only one section in Title 18 that proposes a barrier for ADU production. In our cluster subdivision code, cluster subdivisions are a unique type of subdivisions where there's allowed flexibility because of natural, like the natural environment, whether there's impacts from critical areas. It basically lets a subdivision deviate from some design and minimum lot size standards to preserve natural habitat or unusable native vegetation. But it's stated in Title 18 that these cluster lots are not eligible for ADUs. We don't see very many cluster subdivisions, but in the process of just trying to remove barriers, identifying an exclusionary policy or exclusionary regulation that out of the gate does not allow ADUs was kind of flagged as an opportunity to increase access or opportunity for ADUs. So, the summary of this single proposed solution is to just expand the ADU eligibility throughout the city and through those future cluster subdivisions that might become more common as we have less easy developable subdividable property or lots in the city. So the proposal is just to strike it out, remove it completely. For development regulation amendment criteria is required to meet the following 3. The proposed amendment is consistent with the applicable provisions of the comprehensive plan. The proposed amendment bears a substantial relation to public health, safety, or welfare, and the proposed code amendment or proposed amendment is in the best interest of the residents of the city. In the packet and on the screen here are a number of supporting comprehensive plan goals and policies for this code, recommended code amendment. And here is a summary of our process or the process that was undertaken to get here today with those proposed code amendments. A reminder of the policy question is, should the city amend the Federal Way Revised Code, Title 18 subdivisions to implement the Housing Action Plan Strategy Number 4 to encourage ADU production? And that's it for my presentation.
Councilmember Walsh?
So a question for my edification and for both people that may be watching this online right now. What is a cluster subdivision?
A cluster subdivision is, it differs from maybe a standard subdivision that, actually I could read you the summary right here. How's that? Okay. The purpose of a cluster subdivision is to provide design flexibility, sensitivity to the surrounding environment, and innovation consistent with the site and the comprehensive plan. Promote compatibility with housing on adjacent properties through lot size and design, promote affordable housing, promote reduction of impervious surface, promote usable open space, and promote retention of native vegetation. So it's It's a less stringent, a less, it differs from our regular subdivisions by providing flexibility that doesn't exist elsewhere.
Do we have some examples in the city currently?
Not that I know of. I don't
Okay.
think
All right.
there are any cluster subdivisions,
Okay.
to my knowledge.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I have one question. So we're only talking about, in this amendment, this one piece of our code.
Yes, the reason for that, the reason that there's 2 ordinances and 2 staff reports and 2 agenda bills is because amendments to Title 19 versus, has a different time when the code is enacted, only 5 days, versus for Title 18, it has a 30-day delay. And considering I don't get into this in the next presentation, but considering the popularity and the amount of people that are waiting to see the Title 19 code amendments, I decided to separate them out so that those will be in effect sooner.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Honda?
Have you guys heard much from developers about building ADUs?
Mostly, we hear from property owners that either want to convert their garage or put a prefabricated or a pre-manufactured home like in their backyard. So yes, but I guess mostly we are hearing from property owners themselves. There are a number of like ADU developers that very much specialize in that product that we've heard from, and I've toured a couple in the region. And but I would say the majority is having conversations with people who are talking about where they live.
So an ADU is different than a tiny house on wheels. Is that correct?
Yeah, so an ADU will need to be a permanent structure. And
So do we allow tiny homes on wheels?
I'll let Kent respond to the wheels part.
We do not allow tiny homes on wheels as ADUs, if that's what you're asking. It would be prohibited because the building code wouldn't allow it. You have to have hookups, you have to have like proper, normal sewer hookup, all that sort of stuff that a tiny home on wheels wouldn't. So no.
So do we allow them anywhere in the city?
I believe that we consider tiny homes on wheels as recreational vehicles. So there's sections in the code for if you have an emergency and your house burns down, you can live in a recreational vehicle for certain months, for a certain time threshold as a temporary solution. But in terms of like a permanent housing solution, that's not considered or a viable option.
Yeah, I'd have to look a little bit more to be 100% sure, but I don't think they're allowed as a permanent dwelling unit anywhere in the city for sure. It's most, if they are allowed, it's as temporary uses.
So if there's a tiny home, they took the wheels off, that's still not an ADU because it's not connected to sewer and
So Cheney will get into this a little bit in the next presentation, but one of the proposals for the next ordinance has to do with allowing prefabricated structures to constitute ADUs. That would be likely a prefabricated structure, a tiny home that had the wheels removed. It's possible that could be permitted in the city so long as it met building code, which they'd have to do a bunch of renovations, changes and stuff to do that. But it's possible that at least with the proposed ordinance, that could constitute an ADU.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Council President?
So I have a couple of questions. So, making a house for an attached ADU, it, makes a lot of sense. You convert your basement or your garage or whatever for an attached ADU. But Ben Taylor was saying something about these are very, very popular. So if it's a detached ADU, is that something that can be sold separate from the house, or is it just something for rental?
Good question. I'll let Kent respond.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be sold separately from the real property perspective. The one person would own the entire parcel of land, or whomever, a group of people maybe, would own the entire parcel, including the land that the ADU is on. That being said, somebody could privately lease or potentially even buy an ADU from the property owner and go into some sort of a property use agreement to live there. So, yeah, short answer, the property will be under one ownership, but the ADU could be leased or otherwise sold, but it would just be the ADU.
So all of these ADUs, because we have still a lot of our properties I work for the Water Sewer District, so I know that we still have a number of properties in our city that are not sewered. But do all detached ADUs have to have sewer?
All detached ADUs would have to have sewer the same way new residences would have to have sewer, if that makes sense. So if it's in an area where a new residence would have to have sewer, then yes.
I was kind of wondering, what's our policy when we are putting in sidewalks or widening the roads? Do we then, because the water and sewer are separate as far as the sewer goes, do we then ask them if they're going to put the line in? Do they put the line in separately, or is it only under a developer agreement?
By they, I'm assuming you mean Lake Haven?
The Lake Haven, yeah.
So they have all of our project lists, and it's kind of case-by-case basis. So I think all three of the options that you laid out have been used in the past where, when we sit down with Lake Haven, they say, they don't want to sewer that area, they don't have an interest, whatever the case may be. So there's some that are no. There are some that, yes, they do install pipes for future service. And then there's some, to your point, there are developer extensions that happen to be concurrent with where we're doing work. So we use all three, but there's not a de facto policy. It is this when we do a project.
I know that they will extend under a ULID or a developer extension agreement, but it seemed to me that if we're ripping up the roads, we ought to be putting in the sewers at the same time, but
We make that.
they have to pay for that.
Correct. We make that option available to Lake Haven. And like I said, situationally, sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no.
So one of the things I always thought that we should be doing is that since it's going to, it would benefit our citizens, but it would also benefit us because we wouldn't rip up the road again at a later date, that we should help them find the funding, maybe the state, federal funding, to put the sewers in at the same time that we're expanding the road. It just seems to me it would make sense, but it's just a suggestion, not that we're going to do it. It just seems to me.
Yeah, I can certainly talk to the Director Bowman at Lake Haven and see what traction he would have with that. I will say the majority of our projects tend to be in areas that have higher traffic, which tends to be the areas with existing sewer, as opposed to some of the areas where they're on-site septic for the most part. Just based on wear and tear happens to our systems, that tends to be the areas that we're focused on. But I can certainly talk to John and
Yeah.
go from there.
It seems to me we ought to be partnering on that kind of a thing. I can't imagine, a developed city, like a larger city, over years, and having sections of the city that would not be sewered. They would be on septic still. I can't imagine that would be.
Yeah,
And somehow, somewhere in the future, this has got to happen.
potentially. I mean, if housing continues to densify in the areas we're talking about, I would agree with you. ULIDs are the pretty common way to do
Very
that.
expensive. ULIDs are very expensive for the homeowner.
They are, but that tends to be the most common way to move this conversation forward. But that would be something Lake Haven's board would have to take action to implement.
There are some areas of our city that are in lower income areas that
There
do
are.
need sewers. Because I know this from 30 years back. But, and that were offered, actually, low-income financing, and they refused it. I mean, it just shocked me that they would refuse that, but it seemed to me we ought to be able to figure that one out. Anyway, at any rate, one last question. Cottage housing, it's not to do with ADUs, but cottage housing, are we no longer, is that no longer something that was popular, or what?
The cottage housing is still an option for development. I think that was my first code amendment, like 2020. We removed the provision about there being the time limit of what do you call it, like a pilot project, treated it like a pilot project. So previously, our cottage code would only allow 3 projects to kind of test out if we liked it or not. We removed that provision, so now there's no limit on them. I would say that cottage housing has a number of very specific requirements by zoning, by the minimum lot size and stuff, so.
Yeah, it seemed to me that, when we had the cottage housing that, like over at Mirror Lake, that was developed, it was the same price as a regular home, which I think our intention was if it's going to be a smaller home, the price would be less. So I'm not sure if we get into that. I would think that, if I'm going to be a first-time home buyer, and I'm a policeman or a teacher, and I have a choice between an ADU or a condo or a cottage house, I might really want to look at a cottage housing if it was reasonably priced. And I would think that that would be something we'd want to be also looking into, but not making it the same price as a regular house. That didn't
I
make
think
sense.
it's a case of the market demand. I mean,
I
it's the
know.
market is what dictates the
Yeah.
price, really.
Well, anyway, thanks. I'm not sure how much of the price for the cottage housing over in Miller had to do with our regulations or permitting requirements or, you know, putting in the roads, or I don't know. I'm just saying that I would like to see us, you know, promoting cottage housing, because it's a cool idea, but thanks.
It's like more, sorry, just so I understand, like cottage housing is like smaller, more dense, single family?
Yeah, we talked about one over in Still Lake a number of years ago that was going to be kind of like a grouping of houses that I think the developer didn't, I think it was like 2008, and they didn't have the money to do it, but it was going to have a mutual area that people would, but it was more like townhouses, and you'd have one master bedroom on one level and one master bedroom on the upper level, but they could have view of the lake, and each had their own garage, and they were attached like a duplex would be, and they were a grouping of them, like, you know, I don't remember how many there were, but it was a great idea. I don't know what happened to that, but anyway, just throwing that out there again.
Lydia, do you have a question?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Just to say that I appreciate what's been said and what's presented and the discussion, because I think this is what we need in the future. And to Council President Kortchmar, the house I'm in now, if I were to be on the market to buy it today, I wouldn't be able to afford it just because of the increase in cost of housing. And so I think all these different mixes would be really beneficial to the people who want to buy in Federal Way just because of the cost of increase. So I do appreciate all the different options that are being presented and that we're looking to help people purchase and live in Federal Way. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
You have, okay, I'll let you, you're next, and then I'm going to go.
I have a question on sewers and septic. If an ADU is built and it's non-attached to the main home, and the main home is on septic, the ADU has to be on sewer. Does the main home then have to go on sewer?
I don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head, unfortunately.
I do. They can't if the sewers aren't in the vicinity. So
Well,
there's, but, you know,
They just said that ADUs have to be on
right.
sewer, right?
Cor-
So-
Correct, yes. The development, I guess what I said specifically was that the ADU would be required to be on sewer if a new single-family residence in that same area would be required to be on sewer.
So if it's a older home, that, we have a number of homes that are still on septic. If the home is on septic, they don't have a sewer hookup there, the owner doesn't want to do that, then the ADU can be on the septic system. And then it would have to be redesigned to fit.
Maybe. Again, I don't know the answer to that question without knowing more, and maybe even asking Lake Haven, because that's at least
okay.
So-
somewhat of their purview.
I don't think it could be an ADU, but if they're on septic and they have enough drain field area, they could be on a separate, they would short plat it out, is that what you short, or,
They'd have to do a septic test to see it would support more than one structure.
and if you have enough drain field, then you can build a separate small house on your property. It wouldn't be considered an ADU. But they could be on septic. You'd have two houses on septic, essentially, could even be on the same lot, but you'd probably separate it out.
So my question is, ADUs, I think they're great ideas, but I know in Kirkland, what they do is they build a house, they put a wall in it and call it a common wall, and then they have an ADU and they let the developer or the builder separate them into 3 lots so they can all be sold. Are we thinking about that? Because I would hate to be the person who gets an ADU in somebody's backyard and thinks I have a house, but I have to cut a deal with the landowner and they can't sell it to me. I mean, is that something in our process that we've thought about?
I don't think that's covered or would be
Well,
allowed under our
this is just
existing.
getting ADUs going, I get that.
Yeah.
But it seems to me the next step would be for ownership, if I'm a homeowner and I'm going to put an ADU or two ADUs, I don't know what, I guess you could put 6 now because of the new state law, right? Up to 5 if you have one that's low income and 50% for 50
Maybe our
years.
code doesn't allow for that yet, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
I mean, so there's a lot of flexibility, but it seems like we should be making it so that you could actually take that ADU and make it a sellable product instead of just a rental product. I mean, I know this is not doing that, but that would be something I think we should be thinking about.
I have one more question on ADUs, when you're done.
Go ahead.
Can an ADU be those shipping containers, can that be considered an ADU?
Again, I don't want to steal Cheney's thunder because that's in the next presentation, but as proposed, yes.
Why don't we vote on this one here, because this is just one little cluster of something we don't have in the community, and get to the fun of it. Okay.
I have one other question. I mean, kind of in relation to yours, you know, I mean, if making it so that the ADU was saleable, I mean, is that basically would be condominiumizing
It's
the
short,
ADU?
That's one.
it's short platting your lot very
Well,
quickly.
Yeah, there are multiple ways that you could potentially sell, in air quotes, an ADU in a manner. One of them might be condominiumization, one of them might be short platting. Both of those are potential ways that it could be done.
All right. So with that said, I move, hold on just a second here. This disappears too quickly. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on June 20th, 2023.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now that we asked all the questions for the next one, we can start and ask them again. You're up.
All
You
right.
can just answer them as you're talking.
Yeah, and if you want to chime in during the presentation until the end, we can do that too. All right, so this is, part 2. This is for the development or the proposed code amendments to Title 19, which is our development regulations. So the policy question is, should the city amend the Federal Way Revised Code, Title 19 Development Regulations to implement Housing Action Plan Strategy Number 4 to encourage ADU production? So this presentation goes into a little more background, so maybe I should have had this first, but that's okay. I'm going to go over the ADU trends in Federal Way, discuss the desired outcomes, review key issues and barriers, and then present the proposed solutions. So ADUs come in a lot of shapes and sizes, detached, attached, basement, attic, and here are some photos of examples, some from Federal Way and some in other places in the state. So just a reminder, the city adopted the Housing Action Plan in October of 2021 and identified 4 objectives and 7 strategies for implementing that Housing Action Plan. And strategy number 4 is to encourage ADU production. And we plan to do that by modifying the development regulations to remove the barriers of production and then also to promote ADU development through marketing and streamline permitting. So yeah, basically that. So here's a glimpse at the ADU production in Federal Way from 2001 to 2021. The purple bar graphs are the numbers of ADUs that are permitted, received their land use permit, and the blue is the ADUs that received their certificate of occupancy. They actually were built and approved. As you can see, that's a horrible ratio.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's like, why do it?
Well, I think a lot of people may not have a lot of experience when they get started and don't realize the financial cost, the regulatory impacts, and currently the city requires a kind of a 2-step dance for permitting. So maybe you got your land use approval and you think you're done, but you're not. Then you have to go to building permits, and there's a number of conditions of approval that require recording covenants with the county, and those all add up to little hurdles that I think can be attributed to why we're not seeing a 100% success rate or 60% or maybe 70% success rate. And just a glimpse at what our ADUs that were permitted look like. The ADUs that get permitted detached are more common to be permitted than attached, but we see that the ones that end up being built and get their certificate of occupancy are attached, well, slightly, but are the attached dwelling units. So permitting, I kind of already covered this a little bit, but as you can see from those numbers, that there's a low construction rate or final rate for ADUs because, that could be attributed to the fact that the current regulations require a land use permit, where the planner will make sure the ADU is located where it's appropriate and allowed. You're going to provide any required on-street parkings. You're going to check the lot coverage, that there's not too much impervious surface. And once that permit is done, then the applicant applies for a building permit. And when that building permit comes in, it comes with the site plan, and the planner is going to do the same exact review again. All right, I saw this before, but now I need to check. Is it still in the same location? Is it impeding setbacks? Is the lot coverage still the same? Is it taller than the house? And so it's a kind of a duplicative process, but that's one of the issues is permitting. Number two is the cost to develop ADUs. So there's a financial toll to developing ADUs in the city. One, the purple portion of that pie graph is the cost for the ADU permit itself. In 2021, it was $540, or might be 2022, $548. Now it's over $600 to get just your land use permit, applying for your land use permit. And then that time you're also charged a school impact fee that the applicant would pay at the time of building permit. So school impact fee is to make.
Have anymore.
It's true?
But we do have a park fee. We have a park fee.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
like possibly, and then the blue is the building permit. So over half of these permits are from the ADU permit itself, the land use decision, and impact fees that the city assesses. And then another issue with ADU production is the restrictive regulations. So non-conforming minimum lot sizes. Here is a map of neighborhoods in the city. Likely most of them in purple here were already short platted or subdivided before the city incorporated. And when the city incorporated, applied a zoning district with a minimum lot size that was not compatible with that neighborhood. So some of them are shy by less than 100 square feet, where the minimum lot size is 9,600 square feet, but every lot in that neighborhood is 9,500 square feet or 9,400 square
But we're going to fix that now, right?
Yes, this is
Okay.
an issue that's gonna, yes, I'm teeing myself up, I can go faster, I'm sorry. ADU typology, so the city's regulations currently prohibit prefabricated structures for ADUs. Although they are a very common and popular product out right now, they're not allowed in the city. Another restrictive or barrier in our regulations is a portion of our housing stock was developed, in the 60s, Rambler single-story houses that don't have high pitches, and there are a number of styles of ADUs, such as those that have the parking underneath, so a garage with maybe an apartment on top, an ADU. And on all of those lots that are, as I described, ADUs are not allowed to exceed the height of the primary structure. So it results in just the ADU being impacted on the size and the height. And there's different styles and different pitches now, so and different building code impacts that can make it harder to find an ADU that's equal or less of the height of some of that housing I've described. Our maximum height for ADUs are right now 800 square feet or 40% of the size of the primary structure, whichever is less. So you may believe that you have the ability to put an ADU that's 800 square feet, except if you have a 1,000 square foot house. You can only have a 400 square foot ADU. So for scenarios in which we want to convert like a complete floor plate of your house, the basement or the attic, what we're seeing is, or what we're guiding an applicant is, you got to put up some walls and call that storage, because that won't be carded as your ADU, but this can. So it's kind of this unnecessary inflexibility in our code to allow the floor plate. So we have to require designation of non-living storage space to make something that makes a lot more sense in terms of conversion, or converting a floor to an ADU. So the proposed solutions are to streamline the permitting process, save time and money for the applicant, save time for the applicant. Number two, reduce costs for ADU production, which is of the things that are within our control. And number three is to remove those regulatory barriers. The proposed regulations will have to meet the development regulation amendment criteria that I read in my last presentation, and is supported by the comprehensive plan goals and policies in your packet and on the screen. I have the exact amendments like redlined in this presentation, but I was told that's way too long. So I'll go over them briefly here. So in terms of permitting, that's removing the land use permit.
What's that?
So in terms of streamlined permitting, I'm just going to hop back. So to implement the summary of the proposed solution is to remove the land use permit. All that land use review can be done at the building permit. So an applicant, a property owner who wants to put an ADU on the property, they don't have to apply for one permit and then the other, they just apply for one. In order to reduce the cost of the ADU is exempt ADUs from the school impact fees.
Which we've already done.
So, yeah, it's just good to put it in code too in case that ever
Got it.
changes as well. But yeah, what will happen.
Can I ask a timeout?
Sure.
So today, we don't have school impact fees, but someday, somewhere they may, and you're saying exempt them forever?
Yes.
Unless the code is changed to remove the exemption.
Right, but it would seem to me that, I'm just bringing this up, we have in our code the school impact fees, and we put this escalator clause that we may do in the future. Wouldn't it be better planning to have that mechanism already there than to have to go through the whole process if things change? I mean, I'm not opposed to exempting them. It just seems to me that that's kind of like 20 years from now, who knows what we're going to think about. So if we have a structure, it's probably already in place.
We're not going to exempt park impact fees, are we?
No.
From ADUs?
We
Just
just-
school?
Well,
Oh, yes?
I
Are
hope
you
she doesn't
smiling?
bring that up.
Well, there are no park impact fees right now, so.
Well, yeah, there are. Well, when we vote on them, there will be.
So I'm amending the code that's written, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But one thing I was reminded
Sorry.
of, the school district is in support of exempting ADUs. I think
good.
something I haven't covered is the user. So sometimes the ADU, or a lot of times that we're hearing, is it's for households that want a place for their parents to live by. So the aging generation to live on site nearby, or adults with disabilities. So the children or of a family in particular that's spoken about, desires for ADUs, they have an adult with disabilities and they'd like to have an independent household or an independent living style that's close to home, and that being an option for an ADU. In terms of like student generation and impacts to schools, I think that the ADUs provide a unique housing solution that other housing options might not, that don't, whether it's intergenerational or other, but.
Yeah, we'll see in the future who lives in an ADU. It could be a small family, who knows, with children going to school, but I don't have a problem with them not paying school impact fees.
Okay.
Yeah,
But we don't know in the future who's going to be living in the ADUs. We know now who probably would, but who knows?
I think that sometimes, it could be the young couple. I mean, with us, we had kids come back and live at home after they were married in order to save down for their own down payment for their own house, and so it could be sometimes where it's a young, the next younger generation is there too.
and along that line, I know that the ADUs I've been involved in already, they are not for elderly people or disabled to come live there. They're rented out. They're just maximizing the lot size. So
That is a potential
when we're
user.
talking about middle housing, which this is all about, I think we need to be really forthcoming, and middle housing could be anybody. And as the future goes and costs go, I think it's going to be more, as Jack says, young couples, kids coming home. So the ADU is just a less expensive place to live when you're getting started, and a for-profit location probably. But I'm not opposed to exempting them from school fees. So,
Okay.
okay, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so I already mentioned, there are some changes that need to happen in Title 19 to be consistent with the code provisions from Title 18. So there's a number of sections that will be updated there as well.
Could I just interrupt? So are you talking about school impact fees in the future for attached dwelling units or detached dwelling units?
I think it's all of them. I honestly believe what you're gonna have, see, is, if our code allows it, multiple ADUs in people's backyards so they can afford their housing, and it's gonna be a profit center and a building thing that we're opening Pandora's box. And there'll be a lot of them, which isn't bad, but it's
An
middle
AD
housing.
Yeah, an ADU can be attached, detached, whatever. It's,
Yeah. I mean, think about Kirkland. I mean, very expensive place, but they're taking lots and dividing them into three. You build a mega mansion, you build a attached ADU or duplex, and then you have an ADU in the back, and the guy sells 3 pieces of property.
So yeah, there's I think a wide variety of potential users of the ADU, but I had a phone call the other day where it was a retired gentleman who built the ADU to help supplement his
Yeah.
taxes,
So
to
you
pay for his property taxes since he's retired. So fixed income, it's a way to live in, like, age in place, stay in your home, or, but so I think there's a variety of, especially what we hear on the planner on duty, of people asking questions.
Okay.
Great, okay, the provision about those non-conforming lots, all those purple neighborhoods, that we would then, remove that provision, or that prohibits ADUs on legally non-conforming lot sizes that don't meet the zoning district.
So you're gonna open it up to every lot in Federal Way. That's what we're doing, correct?
Yeah, we're expanding
Yeah.
opportunities for ADUs and stuff.
Okay.
Not any, so it's not in
Pretty much.
multifamily zones, it's not in
Pretty much
commercial zones.
everybody.
So, yeah, single family.
And there are still other restrictions like setback and other requirements that apply that could
Infeasible,
exclude
yeah.
some lots, right?
That's true, yeah. Just removing one layer of, like, off the back, no, like, that's the first thing we check. All right, so our current regulations require, if an ADU in a neighborhood that is outside of a quarter mile from a high-capacity transit stop or a major transit stop, provide an additional parking space on the property. That can be really challenging, considering our front yard setbacks, and oftentimes the houses are built along the front yard setback, and our code maximizes the width of a driveway up to 20 feet. So there's a proposal to add flexibility to meeting the requirement of providing an on-site parking space by allowing driveways to be extended to allow an additional, up to an additional 10 feet for the new parking space, up to 30 feet wide in the front yard setback, which doesn't exist now. So to add flexibility, if we're going to require it, then make it easier to achieve, because that's often the second thing that keeps people from being able to do an ADU. There's a number of dimensional standards, so I mentioned the 800 feet or 40%. So there's the proposed code is to up to 1,000 square feet for a detached ADU, and then for an attached ADU that doesn't result in any expansion of the structure, except for minor modifications, that it can be the size, up to the size of the largest floor plate of the house, kind of that graphic with the blue basement, the white middle house, and the blue attic. So to allow that. Also, currently, I mentioned this briefly, that currently we require a restrictive covenant to be recorded with the county as a condition of approval, declaring that the property owner will live in either the ADU or the house for 6 months out of the year. That's not something that the city enforces or the city monitors, and it's basically another hurdle, another step that can hold up a permit. So we are recommending to remove the owner occupancy requirements. Another thing in our code is that home occupations are not allowed in ADUs. I've had a couple inquiries from property owners wanting to build an ADU in their backyard that'll have an exclusive living space, but then also the area to prepare, I think it was like a catering business. And right now that would be not allowed. So we're just really trying to remove some red tape to for a lot of different options, even if they're not super popular or prevalent, just because we've heard it and said, okay, you know, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to just add that restriction. And I think that's the bulk of it. And then we talked earlier about prefabricated structures, so allowing ADUs to be prefabricated structures.
So if you were going to have part of the ADU a business, so my question is that an ADU can't just be a business. You have to have a dwelling unit there, someone actually living there, and then part of it could be a business.
So the code has limitations for home occupations in ADUs, so I guess I'm not sure I understood the question. I'm sorry.
So the ADU could not be built just to run a business, like a catering business out of it. You have to live in part of it.
Correct.
Thank you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple questions. I think everything you've gone over makes perfect sense except for two.
Okay,
I have a real problem with the parking spaces.
okay.
We get enough complaints about people parking in front of houses and cars everywhere, and our streets are crowded, and I think we've gone too far with that. If we're gonna say you don't have to have a place to park if you have an ADU or enough parking for the cars.
Can I clarify?
Maybe I'd misunderstood, but I do not want people with ADUs parking on the street in front of people's houses.
Yeah, may I clarify?
Yeah, please.
And I have some imagery that might help. This is all the code. Okay, so in the bottom right corner, you'll see two houses and a red line
Yeah,
in the front yard.
Yeah.
So that red line is the front yard setback.
right?
Currently, our code doesn't allow you to have more than a 20-foot driveway in your front yard setback unless you meet a set of criterias. And so the proposed solution to not being able to accommodate another parking space if you want an ADU is to allow a wider driveway to accommodate the parking space either in front of the house or allow you to have extend the driveway to the backyard where a parking space could then be provided.
And when we do that, we're talking about concrete or asphalt or in special impervious materials and not parking on the grass.
Yes, there are requirements that will apply for the parking for ADUs that, of this materials that the parking.
Okay, whatever the materials are, and it will be curb cut, and it will look like it's supposed to, and not driving up, and then I turn over here and I have a gravel place to park a car.
It shouldn't be gravel.
Well, I got that, but I'm talking curve cut, so it's a real driveway?
So that's outside of the planning realm of
But-
like the driveway. So I might defer to EJ about
But-
expanding or increasing the curb cut.
Well, because if you have a ADU and you have a two-car garage, and two cars can drive up the driveway, and I'm gonna have a third one, you should make it so you have three cars can drive up, instead of drive up the two and pull over to the left or pull to the right, so it goes like a tree. That's what I mean by curb cut.
No, I understand. It's just those regulations are outside of Title 19.
Well, but they should be in conjunction. If we're
Okay.
gonna do this, we gotta do it over there also.
I talked to Public Works staff about this beforehand, and my understanding is that this will function no differently than a 30-foot wide driveway outside a three-car garage. So, in other words, the curb cut and everything will be the same as it would be for a three-car garage. So
Three-car
it's li-
garage.
Correct. So this
Okay.
just adds ADUs as another reason why you can have a 30-foot wide one along with three-car garages. You can have a
Okay.
30-foot wide one.
Okay. And then, you see a lot of complaints about Airbnbs.
About what?
Airbnb.
Uh-huh.
Can we put in our code that these things cannot be an Airbnb?
We could, but that is something that's explicitly mentioned in a House Bill 1337.
Which
so-
says that you have to mandate them?
Or that you can't restrict them from being rented. Okay, now I need to look at it again. So I guess this is a good time to mention, these ADU code amendments are proposed in response to the city's needs, what we're hearing at the counter and as a permit. And there are additional, there's a House Bill 1337 that we will be required to comply with 6 months after the after the comp plan is updated. So in June of 2025.
Okay.
And these code provisions, these proposed changes, don't encapsulate all of the requirements. So there are additional requirements that are, I'll be back, that are going to be coming back.
So are you saying the state requires Airbnbs?
No, that you can't prohibit.
But that means they require them. I mean, if you can't prohibit them, and all around the country that's happening where people are prohibiting Airbnbs because of the transit, what
So
goes
this
on.
is, sure.
An
So
Airbnb
we-
is a business, so if we require that you have to live in the ADU, it cannot be, the whole thing could not be an Airbnb.
So so 1 second, let me
Okay.
do that and then I can do that. So there was a presentation in front of the city council in 2021 about short-term rentals. This comes in waves through the city where they're a big problem and HOAs get kind of wound up about them and then we have a conversation about them. And so the conversation that I led with the council in 2021, there was not an interest in regulating short-term rentals in the city. So we kind of left everything sit. We can revisit that conversation as many times as you guys want to. So if there's a desire to limit short-term rentals, we should look at it holistically in the city and not just at ADUs. That would be my suggestion, if there's a desire.
So that's a different answer than we have to let them in. Okay. Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda?
Well, so we just determined that you have to live in the ADU, that the
That's-
whole ADU cannot be a business, but an Airbnb is a business.
Sorry, to clarify that, you have to live, i.e. reside in the ADU, but I don't think there's a specific temporal duration for which you have to reside in it. Like you don't have to be there for 7 months for it to be free to qualify. It just has to be, it couldn't be an ADU where there is nobody sleeping, living ever in it, is what I was trying to.
Can I
communicate.
interject?
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
what the code currently says is you have to record a covenant that says that the owner of the property or owner of the residence will live in either the ADU or the house 6 months out of the year. It can't both be rented out. And we are proposing to remove that requirement. It's not something that's
Why we-
monitored, that's
why?
not something that's tracked by the city, and it's a financial cost to record a covenant and is another hurdle to development or to production.
But that's like, I have a hard problem with that. I mean, I get it. But if we're gonna let ADUs, which we should, go into the neighborhoods, and now we're telling people you don't have to live there, you now have 2 rentals around your neighbors that nobody's policing, or I call it policing. I think we're opening the door way too far by saying you don't, right now we say you have to live there 6 months. Is that what you said?
That's what the requirement is.
And now we're gonna say, hey, do whatever you want, we don't care.
It's not being enforced anyway. is it?
It's not, and the door is already opened for us.
Who opens it?
That's in 1337, so we can adopt it, you can propose
Well,
that the code changes now, or,
If I could comment on the enforcement piece of it for a second, to be more accurate, to clarify what the city does with respect to those covenants. They are still covenants. They're legally binding documents that are recorded against the property that show up in a title report. Any home buyer is going to see that covenant when they go in there. They're going to see it on the title report. It's not as if it's nothing by any means. In fact, if somebody violates that, they're instantly in violation of our code. They probably also have title issues and a bunch of other stuff going on. So it's not as if there's nothing there. That being said, we do not actively enforce those covenants, so we're not like inspecting to make sure somebody lives there for 6 months out of the year. But I just want to be clear that the city is not ignoring its code with respect to that. It's just not actively patrolling for violations.
But most things get code enforced, I believe, when somebody complains. And now we just took away the citizen's right in their neighborhood to complain. It's not I mean, we have codes and we can't go knock on everybody's door and do all this thing, but if we take that code away, we've now taken, anybody that comes up here and is gonna complain in the future, we can't do anything. Where now, somebody parks on their driveway's wrong, or they're parking in front, I mean, we hear about it and code enforcement does something.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so, I don't see that us changing the way we do things, but I don't know. I don't think that's wise just to say, okay, we're not gonna have something in the code. Then just say, hey, it's 2 party houses now in your neighborhood.
An option.
That's just my opinion.
Okay.
You said that the way the code currently is, they have to record with the county? And
Yes.
what's the expense of that? Not just the recording fee, but preparation? I mean, how much is that adding to the cost of having an ADU, that recording?
I'm not completely sure.
I would guess in the hundreds is probably the correct answer, more if they want to be really formal and consult an attorney to draft it, but it's probably in the hundreds. It's also a bit of a, speaking from personal experience, it's quite a pain to record documents properly with the county, so it can frequently take a lot of, you send it there, they reject it for XYZ reason, you send it, they reject it for the next reason. It can be a long process.
So it's a significant hurdle.
I agree. Yes, it is a significant hurdle. Yeah. The actual, and EJ whispered in my ear, and he's absolutely right, that the actual recording fee itself is minimal. The recording fee itself is $20, you said, 19, $20. But you also have to get the form, you also have to, talk to your real estate agent if you want. You also have to maybe consult with an attorney if you want to be careful about the covenant language. There are other costs that are associated with it, other than that minimal upfront administrative cost of filing it.
Any other?
Yeah, but personally, I mean, I follow your concern, but I don't think it's, I mean, I'm not hot on the idea of a bunch of rentals, but I don't think that, I think that the advantage of making it easier for people to develop outweighs the concern of rentals.
But we're making, see, this is where I disagree. We're making it very easy, which we should do. But we're also giving up some, in my opinion, some of the responsibility as a city we should have. If there's something goes on and it gets reported and we have to go check on it through the code enforcement, by saying just out of the door, you don't have to live there, you can do whatever you want. It's, heyday Hesperia in 1960, go for it. I mean, I think we're being, I applaud you for saying we should do this. I think we have to, but we should have some rules and regulations and not just say anything goes. And that's what we're doing, in my opinion.
Is there any way that in our code that we could make it to address Jack's concern there, that it wouldn't all be rentals without having them have to do the hurdles of recording with the county?
Yeah, you could simply put in the code that either the ADU or the main residence has to be owner occupied for X number of months if you wanted to, period. That way they wouldn't have to record a covenant doing that, but it would still be a code violation not to do it that could trigger code enforcement.
Seems like that'd be the best way to do it, then.
As long as we have the ability as a city to intervene if need be.
Yeah.
Okay, I captured what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize. Shane, I think you were, at some point, we got sidetracked. You did want to go, I think, into more detail about the prefabricated allowance and the shipping container allowance for ADUs, hopefully.
Can show some photos. So here are some examples of prefabricated ADUs that aren't currently allowed. If they're maybe converted from a shipping container, they're still going to be required to meet the building code, which is very challenging from what we hear to do at DIY. So it's these specialized companies that are doing them.
So can I ask one other question? This reminds me of chicken coops, many, many years ago. You know, people came and said, I want chicken coops in our neighborhoods. And we voted on it, and we made chicken coops, and we said you couldn't have a rooster. But everybody's chicken coop is different ideas of what a chicken coop should look like. So one neighbor got mad because they had 20, we only had 5 hens, but they all look different. And my brother has a multi-million-dollar container home, so I know what these things are like. They're really nice. Are we going to give some sort of guideline if you want a container home or you want a home that's on wheels coming in that you put on a concrete base, I'm assuming? Are we going to give some ideas of that, or are we going to just let the people decide what they think is nice and the neighbors are going to complain about?
So currently, there aren't any design guidelines or standards besides maybe like which direction the front door faces. And there's nothing proposed. I think a level of design review could add time and, or is maybe, isn't in the, I guess in terms of like removing barriers and removing time, or cost and time-saving options, that would maybe go the other way. It's not like, it could be an option, but it's not being proposed.
Because I might think that, hey, moving a fifth wheel in and putting a piece of concrete down and sticking it in my backyard, and, you know, it's a nice 1980 fifth wheel, so I can do it. I might think that's the greatest thing in the world. But my neighbors behind me are tired of the fifth wheel that's been placed there that's got rats running around and different things, and it's all peeling and all that. It just seems to me if we're going to open the door up, we should have some minimum.
It's got to meet building code, though.
Well, but that would mean it's hooked up to my septic.
When you say fifth wheel, you mean it's like on wheels?
No, I'm just painting a picture.
Okay.
We're trying to see what the picture is.
I'm just saying we could open ourselves up for my picture of what I think's acceptable, because this opens up, and what Linda's and Susan's idea of what is something that should be in the backyard that I'm looking at every day across the fence might be different. And if we don't have any standards other than it's got to be a sewer or septic tank, and I think we're missing a little bit of what we should do.
So do HOAs have any say in what an ADU might look like in an HOA neighborhood?
Yes, so any HOAs that have private covenants that, well, even more extremely say no ADUs whatsoever, those will still be effective. There'll still be none allowed. A lot of HOAs have design criteria of their own, there are specific paint types that you can pick from,
Right.
certain roof types, all that stuff. If those apply in the covenants to ADUs, then they will apply to these ADUs too. In other words, yes, HOAs can still regulate the design of these things if they'd like to.
But can an HOA say no ADUs,
Yes.
even in the state?
Yes, up until, I believe, so there's a certain deadline in one of the most recently enacted state laws that says basically it grandfathers all HOA rules that prohibit ADUs from before that time, but it doesn't allow them to be passed going forward, I believe is one of the new laws. And I think that's happening quite soon, if I'm remembering correctly, like in the next month or so, that like drop dead date by which you have to have those covenants in place if you want them.
Huh, I wonder if more neighborhoods are trying to form HOAs now.
Heck, my neighborhood's got a lot of HOAs, and I haven't heard any of that. We don't have any of
So
them.
do CC&Rs, I mean, for example, in my neighborhood, initially there were there's CC&Rs.
Right.
And the CC&Rs provided for the establishment of an HOA, but it was never established.
Yeah,
Do those CC&Rs, are they still, what's the?
again, speaking from personal experience, in practicing, not being in an HOA myself, but those questions get very complicated very quickly legally about what covenants are currently in place and what are enforceable. And sometimes there are situations where it's set up to be an HOA, and the HOA is supposed to pass CC&Rs, and it just never gets done. And so there aren't any CC&Rs that apply to certain HOAs. Sometimes HOAs pass CCNRs that are illegal or they don't pass them properly, and then those aren't enforceable either. So there's unfortunately kind of a universe of different possible answers to that question.
Interesting. This whole, discussion is extremely interesting to, just the way that, people live and, the way people will live in the future, so.
With this, I mean, this is, the purpose tonight is to pass this on for a public hearing, right? Or is it for ordinance? Actually,
It'll get, the recommendation is to move it on to first reading.
first reading, okay. And
There's
with
already
first
been a-
reading, there'll be a public hearing with first reading.
There'll be a public meeting at which public comment can be provided. There won't be a formal public hearing.
Okay.
The formal public hearing on this set of code amendments occurred at the Planning Commission.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Well, I think we should move it on. I mean, there are some little tweaks I personally like to see, but for the sake of affordable housing and middle housing, all that, I don't think, this is kind of something we need to move ahead, isn't it, with what we're doing right now? I mean, we've got a timing issue. Yeah, okay.
With that,
Would
I'd
you
like to make a motion.
Would you make a motion?
I move to forward the proposed ordinance, the first reading on June 20, 2023.
I will second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you very much for that great presentation. Now for the next one. Information only though next, right?
Yes. This is going to be short.
We got all night. It's still light out.
All right, so.
And
Till
Kent doesn't want to
9:30.
go home too soon, he's, he's.
Okay, so this is our, what is this, like our 5th or 6th comp plan update, 2024 quarterly update with the LUTC. And I'm just going to give a brief update on our chapter progress for climate change and resiliency, transportation, and parks recreation. And then a brief summary community engagement schedule, that what we have planned and teed up. So like you may remember that there's a new chapter to the comprehensive plan that hadn't previously existed, which is climate change and resiliency. And the city hired a consultant, Cascadia, to help prepare this chapter for the comp plan. That isn't, at the time, was not a requirement. And the consultant prepared a report that includes a Federal Way emissions inventory, policy review, and then some recommended goals, actually a lot of recommended goals and policies for the community and staff to consider as part of the as part of this new chapter. On June 7th, so on Wednesday, the draft chapter will be presented to the Planning Commission. So for a deeper dive in detail on this, Evan Lewis, my colleague, will be presenting to Planning Commission, and there's still a lot of ongoing outreach for this draft chapter through in-person events and online. So at the farmers market this weekend, we had some poster boards of the goals and asked the community to weigh in on which goals they think are most appropriate or would be most they liked the most, and got a lot of good input. I think we engaged with over 100 people at the farmers market on Saturday, which was really nice. There's also an online survey right now through Engage FW, and the expected completion date of the draft chapter is by the end of 2023. The transportation chapter, I've covered a little bit about the progress on this chapter at one of our quarterly updates, but since then we have set the land use assumptions through 2044 to update or to inform the travel model. So now we have an idea of how many housing units and how many jobs we actually can visualize around the city. And when we think about our regional growth center, so downtown between Peck Highway and I-5 and like 314th and 324th, a majority, well, I guess not a majority, but a really good chunk, a big sizable chunk of our 11,260 housing units are planned for that area, about 5,000. I think it's like 4,900 is planned for around that transit station because there's a lot of capacity there to grow. So that was one of kind of the findings that's kind of on par with our growth strategy through this comprehensive plan update. In this next couple months, we're started or have already started the travel or transportation modeling and are working on initial updates to the goals and policies to the chapter, which were briefed at the Planning Commission. Now, through mid-2024, the city will be hiring a consultant to help with some existing conditions update, the modeling the future scenarios or the future volumes, project scoping and identification, financial review. I think those are for future capital financing and implementation plans of this chapter. There's a lot to this chapter. This is like probably the longest, I feel like, in the comp plan. So there's a really long process that I'm not actually really involved in, but if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to get back to you on those. And then also continued refining the goals and policies of this chapter. And for the Parks and Rec, the city, this is a new chapter, not previously exists, but the city has a PROS plan, a Parks, Rec, and Open Space plan. And between planning and Parks and Rec, we've discussed trying to synchronize better so that this new chapter, the comp plan, will be including or extend the PROS plan for the same planning horizon. So this chapter is, I think, using the existing PROS plan and updating it, and there's a lot of community outreach included or planned for the summer of the fall of this year. And then that way that this PROS plan is integrated as part of the comp plan, it's not so hard to evaluate consistency between this chapter and a standalone document, so it's going to be combined. This Parks and Rec plan will include updated goals, policies, our park inventory and needs assessment, and develop or update the parks capital project list. And yep, this is going to be a new chapter that's consistent with the PROS plan. And that's a map of our existing parks and open spaces in the city. So we're knee deep in the comp plan update. Almost everything is either in progress or put aside because it made enough progress to go back to later, except with the exception of Twin Lakes. The Twin Lakes sub-area plan that was prepared in 2012, that's still there. So we'll need to make some time in the next couple months to identify or scope out exactly how it's going to be updated and what the community engagement will look like for that in particular. So some of these chapters have very targeted outreach, very deliberate outreach on who we want to reach and who we want to talk to in the community. And some of it's like really broad, and oftentimes it's a mix. So for example, in the housing chapter, there's a mix of our outreach. We'll be taking the Housing Action Plan as a framework, as a basis, and then wanting to do targeted outreach to communities that have been historically marginalized and make sure that their input is included as we update any goals and policies and implementing actions. For example, let's see what else. The Human Services, that's a new chapter that's underway, and it's going to have a specific community outreach plan that is tailored to that chapter. So that's working with service providers in the city and different organizations and nonprofits. And yeah, so let me know if you have any questions about any chapters in particular, but we're moving. And so here's a picture from this weekend. And that was at the farmers market where we had asked the community about the climate change question, about the goals and policies for the chapter, or I guess just the goals. And then we also had a poster about our plans for TC3 and promoted the Rising from the Dust demolition ceremony that's scheduled for June 13th at noon at the PAC. We're going to be celebrating this big event to making way for the new redevelopment plan. In the next couple weeks, and besides the June 13th celebration, we're planning to be at Make Music in the park. And so there will be a table specific to the arts, culture, and historic preservation chapter there. And then on the 4th of July, we'll be attending the Red, White, and Blues Festival with all things comp plan update, along with what we have planned for the Kiwanis Salmon Bake, which is not July 28th. I actually think it's in September. So I'll have to update that date. I think
It is July 28th.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's always the fourth Friday in July.
Oh, my bad. All right. Well, in that case, it's correct. Maybe there's something I'm thinking of in September. But I'll have an update for you on that next time.
We have a golf tournament in September.
Fun, okay. Oh, and then here you are, the Rising from the Dust demolition ceremony. If you haven't taken a look at the city's newsletter that came out today, we're working on this event to celebrate. So I hope you all be there. Any questions?
Lydia, do you have any questions? Seeing none, we'll,
No, I don't.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you. Just want to make
Yeah,
sure
thank
you're
you.
still there. No.
I'm still here listening. Thank you.
I wasn't ignoring you, but I couldn't see the hand. So anyway, now we'll go to our progress report on Sound Transit. Thank you, Cheney.
Good evening. All right.
Hey, Keith, before you leave, can I ask one question? Yes, sir. You'll probably get asked tomorrow, how many low-income or moderate-income housing units have we got in the city? Okay? You don't have to answer now, but I just wanted to give you the heads up.
Thank you, sir.
So, good evening. I'm Kent Smith with the Public Works Department, the Sound Transit Liaison, presenting on the activities updates in the city of Federal Way. So, for everything north of 317th Street, they're continuing with storm drainage, landscaping, plinths, noise wall construction, systems duct bank, ballast installation, OCS installation and testing, MSC wall construction. They're doing a little bit of rail delivery and installation and welding along with that. And they're filing up the footings and foundation walls for the traction power substations. And the signal foundation and conduit installation has started for the new signal at Military and Star Lake. For the city center, there's a phase closure still for the 23rd Avenue South that limits traffic to the single northbound lane between 320th and 317th. The first phase is still expected to continue through July. Sewer, water, and additional utility work is ongoing for 23rd Avenue South and South 317th, but they are wrapped up for the most part with a lot of that work. And they're looking to start a little bit of the paving for 23rd Avenue this Friday, June 9th. So it should start to change quickly, but it's just the asphalt paving. It's not the full concrete road yet, so it's going to take some time. Station work still ongoing with more framing, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and the platform level glass work. If you drive by, you should be able to see it. There's a lot more glass up than there used to be. And I believe doors are going in a few locations. Construction of the garage still ongoing with additional deck, column, and wall pours. I think they've finished the 4th level, and there's one more level to go. The end-of-line facility, roofing and exterior and interior walls are being installed. As far as the operations and maintenance facility south, I don't have any significant updates. We're continuing to work with city staff on individual design elements. Similarly, for Tacoma Dome link extension, I don't have any significant updates yet. And I will answer any questions.
So I have one question first, and then I'll let Deputy Mayor. With all the delays that are going on, are we going to have this great finished product sitting for 2 years and all, with tape around it so nobody can get on it, or what's it going to look like?
Tape around it.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, what are we going to, are we going to have this great facility that's going to be done, 2 years ahead of when the train actually shows up?
So from what I understand, they're going to try to do the commissioning and testing sort of simultaneously with finishing up some of the station elements and the roadways. So it will take some time before that's done, but they're going to try to do it concurrently so that it'll open at the same time. But it might be a little bit, but not necessarily years.
Okay, it would just seem to me that it's going to be finished way ahead of when that bridge gets done, right? But maybe I'm missing something.
There's still a lot of work to do. One of the next big phases involves actually closing the existing transit center and then switching over bus routes to where the new location will be. And that's planned for next year. in March at this time. So even when they do that, there's still a lot of work that they have to do, utilities-wise, roadway-wise, in that area they're demoing. So it's going to take some time.
Okay, thank you.
So when will they start working on the rail going to where the maintenance yard might be? Since we pretty much know it's going to be there.
I don't have a great schedule from them yet for when they expect to start. I believe they were looking for their final environmental impact statement that kind of goes along with their NEPA
Okay.
in the second quarter of this year. I don't know if that date is still there. They haven't given me an update yet. But they're trying to hold their opening date of 2029. It may push a couple years for the operations and maintenance facility. Presumably, when this portion is done, they will just start work on the next one, but
Oh. Also, there is, you mentioned the glass going in. Is that glass unbreakable? Is it bulletproof? Is it unbreakable? And the reason I ask, because this is going to be there for a while before it's used by the public. And we've already had parts of the structure tagged already, so it's already, people have already found it. I'm just concerned that they're putting in glass at this point that might need to be replaced because of vandalism. And why, what is the theory behind putting in the glass so early?
I'd have to check. I don't know if it's bulletproof or bullet resistant, but I can certainly ask what the thought is. I do know they have their own budget set aside for maintenance of all their elements, including for any graffiti. So other than that, I don't know.
And the end of the line building, will that, when that's finished, which could be much sooner than when the track is finished, will that be used or will that be just empty until the track is used?
A portion of it is necessary for the bus loop transition, so when they move the buses from the existing transit station to where they'll start pick up and drop off at the next one. So that will actively be used before the station opens, partly because some of the equipment they use to monitor is in place in that location. So it wouldn't just sit empty.
But the buses won't be parked there, right? The
No.
operators will be walking to the end of the line station or building?
So I think the end of line is more for other Sound Transit employees, not the bus drivers.
Oh,
There-
okay.
There'll be a bus layover station that is across the street of 23rd, just south of 317th.
By
That makes sense.
Marlene's, right?
Yeah, near Marlene's. And there will be a location for a bus driver relief building, essentially, where that's where they would be
Okay.
compared to
All right.
the other location.
Thank you. Oh, and the art, have you heard anything more from the artist?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
The latest was a giraffe standing sideways.
Any other questions from anyone? Seeing none, we will adjourn at 6:55.
Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.